Am I the butthole for walking out of my wedding after my fiancé's vows mentioned his ex? I want to share a story that happened recently, and I'm seriously torn about whether I was in the right or if I overreacted. So, here goes. I'm Megan, a 28-year-old woman, and I was engaged to my fiancé, Daniel, who's 30, for over a year. We were about to get married on what I hoped would be the happiest day of my life. The venue, flowers, cake, and everything else had been planned meticulously, and honestly, I was giddy with excitement as the day approached. The morning of the wedding was filled with a mix of emotions. I felt beautiful in my dress, surrounded by my closest friends and family as they helped me get ready. The love and support surrounding me made me feel confident. Meanwhile, Daniel was getting ready on his end, which I hadn't really thought much about. Our families excitedly shuffled into their seats at the venue, waiting to witness what was supposed to be a beautiful union. As I walked down the aisle, I couldn't help but notice how Daniel looked at me. His eyes sparkled, and there was a genuine happiness that made my heart swell. He had promised that he would cherish me forever, and I thought we were both on the same page about our commitment and love. But then, things took a turn. After we exchanged rings and I said my I do's, it was time for our vows. I was ready to pour my heart out to him, expressing my love for the man I had chosen to spend the rest of my life with. When it was Daniel's turn, I watched him with a heart full of love, expecting him to declare the same commitment to me. What he said next completely took me by surprise. He started reminiscing about his past relationships, talking about how wonderful love can be and how it felt to connect deeply with someone. He mentioned feeling a special bond and then, without skipping a beat, he named Jessica, his ex-girlfriend. Jessica taught me so much about love, and I will always appreciate our time together. And then he continued to express that our love was different, but also inspired by those past connections. It felt like a dagger to my heart. I was truly stunned. He was standing there, in front of everyone we cared about, acknowledging an ex during our vows. I honestly couldn't believe it. The room went silent, tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. My heart raced, my mind spun with disbelief, and I felt a whirlwind of emotions, hurt, embarrassment, anger, rising within me. In that moment, I felt betrayed. We had talked about our past relationships countless times before, and I had been under the impression that we had put those memories to rest. To hear him honor his ex-girlfriend in such a huge moment made me question everything. I could feel my face redden and my hands tremble. All I could think about was how to escape this moment. I locked eyes with my best friend, Emily, who looked equally shocked, and I knew I couldn't bear to hear any more. I stood up and walked out of the venue. I heard gasps and murmurs all around me as guests tried to make sense of what was happening. Daniel called after me, but I kept walking, needing to remove myself from that situation to gather my thoughts. Once outside, I burst into tears. I couldn't understand how Daniel could have been so insensitive. I felt like I had been hit by a freight train. After a while, I calmed down enough to take a deep breath and thought through my emotions. I texted Emily to regroup elsewhere because I needed someone who understood the gravity of what had just happened. When Emily joined me, I shared everything I felt, the shock, the heartbreak, and my frustration at Daniel's inability to truly understand the impact of his words. She reassured me that I had every right to feel this way. After a couple hours, we decided to return to the venue. I didn't know what I would say or do, but I felt that I needed to talk to Daniel. As we walked back in, I could see that the atmosphere had changed. Our friends and family were chatting awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. When Daniel spotted me, his face lit up momentarily, but quickly transitioned into confusion and concern. He approached me, and I could see that he had realized something was dreadfully wrong. "Megan, where did you go?" "I was worried," he said, looking genuinely concerned. "Worried? You're the one who mentioned your ex-girlfriend during our vows. How is that okay?" I replied, my voice shaky but steadfast. "What?" "I was just sharing how much I've learned from my past." "It's all part of my journey," he insisted, sounding caught off guard. "Including mentioning Jessica? Really? During our wedding? This isn't about your past. It's about us." I shot back, letting my frustrations blurt out. "But I didn't mean to hurt you." I thought you'd appreciate the sentiment, he defended himself, clearly bewildered. It was like talking to a wall. He didn't even realize how inappropriate it was to mention an ex on such a day. I took a step back, feeling defeated. It hit me then that perhaps Daniel didn't grasp the depth of how honoring his past in that way made me feel. I had reached a boiling point. The anger shifted into despair as I mused briefly over our relationship. It had been filled with so much love, laughter, and support, yet it felt like everything was collapsing on this day due to his thoughtlessness. At that moment, I knew that I couldn't go through with the wedding. I love Daniel, but this wasn't just a small oversight. It was an indication of how misaligned our perspectives were about commitment, respect, and moving forward. You know what? This isn't what I want anymore. I can't marry someone who doesn't understand what commitment means. With those words, I turned and walked out again. I really didn't know where I'd go, but I had to do it for myself. This wasn't just about a momentary lapse. It revealed a deeper discord between us. While I packed up my belongings and left the venue, I felt a mixture of relief and loss. I drove to my parents' house, where they calmed me down and offered support. Daniel repeatedly called and texted, but I didn't have the heart to respond just yet. The shock was still too fresh. By the next day, I finally opened up to my family, who listened patiently and offered their support. They too felt that what occurred at the wedding wasn't what anyone expected, and they understood my hurt. After a few days of silence, I finally gathered the strength to meet Daniel again. I needed closure, and there were questions left unanswered. We met at a cafe, and he looked heartbroken. I've thought about everything, Megan. I realized that mentioning Jessica was a huge mistake. I should have never referenced her against our vows, and I'm so sorry for how it made you feel. I completely understand why you walked out, and I regret it so much, he said, sincerity pouring from his voice. I appreciate your apology, but this speaks volumes about how you view our relationship, Daniel. This isn't just about that moment. I need a partner who respects the boundaries of our relationship, I explained, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't move forward if you still hold on to your past. What can I do? I want to make this work. I love you, he pleaded. But at that moment, I knew the answer. This isn't about what you can do anymore. It's about what should have never been done in the first place. We're just not on the same level for this relationship. After that conversation, we parted ways, and it still hurt. But a sense of peace washed over me over time. I knew I had made the right choice by addressing the issue rather than allowing it to linger beneath the surface. With that realization, I started to heal and focus on myself, my passions, and my journey forward. Over the next few weeks, I took the time to reevaluate my life, my choices, and what I wanted moving ahead. I started spending time with friends, rediscovering who Megan was outside the constraints of a relationship. I took up painting, a hobby I had pushed aside during our engagement, and I found joy in the colors and the creativity that flowed through me. I felt liberated, like the weight of expectations had been lifted from my shoulders. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with Emily, who was incredibly supportive throughout this process. She would often invite me out for coffee dates, reminding me that I was more than just a relationship status. My worth was inherent. You deserve someone who treats you like the treasure you are, Megan. Don't forget that, she often said, and those words began to resonate more and more as the days wore on. Around the 2-month mark, I received a call from Daniel again. He was still trying to reach out, wanting to talk. At that point, I felt ready to have that conversation, albeit with a newfound conviction about my own self-worth. We decided to meet at the same cafe where we had our heart-wrenching closure talk. When I arrived, I found him sitting at the same spot, looking a mixture of regretful and hopeful. "Hey, Megan," he said as I approached. "I've missed you so much. I've done a lot of thinking and soul-searching since we last spoke." "Yeah, it's been a journey for me, too," I offered, feeling the weight of the tension in the air. I sensed his eagerness to reconcile, but I was determined to remain grounded. "I realize I messed up and that I need to take responsibility for my actions," he replied, visibly nervous. "I talked to my therapist about this, the way I mentioned Jessica, how I couldn't let go of my past, and how it was unacceptable for your wedding vows." I nodded, encouraging him to share more. "It's good that you're seeking help." I think that's a step in the right direction, I said, trying to remain open-minded. I want to prove that I can change, that I'm not the same person I was before. I love you, Megan. You're everything to me, and I'm willing to do anything to make things right, he said, his eyes pleading. A part of me wanted to sweep it all under the rug and dive back into the comfort of our relationship, but I couldn't dismiss how our last conversation felt like a crucial turning point. Daniel, I appreciate your honesty, and it seems like you're taking this seriously, but it's going to take much more than just words for me to trust you again. You need to understand that moving forward means respecting what boundaries exist in a relationship. I responded sincerely. I understand, and I'm committed to doing the work. I don't want to lose you over a careless mistake, he pleaded yet again. I sat in silence for a moment, weighing my options. I wanted to believe that people could change and grow, but I also didn't want to reopen old wounds for the sake of comfort. I think we need some time apart. I love you, but I need to rebuild my own confidence and self-worth before I can even consider a reconciliation, I finally said, my voice steady. He nodded slowly, and while it looked like my decision hurt him deeply, I felt a sense of relief. We parted ways once again, but this time, I felt stronger than before. There was clarity in knowing what I wanted and what I deserved. As the months passed, I focused more on my passions and friendships. I traveled a bit with Emily, exploring new places, enjoying life in a way I hadn't for years. The world felt brighter, filled with endless possibilities, and it was exhilarating. Eventually, Daniel reached out again, this time a few months later, simply checking in. It felt less intense now, more like a friendly conversation. I had casually mentioned my newfound interests and aspirations, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well the chat flowed. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just two people trying to reconnect on a different level. That meeting led to another and another, slowly morphing our relationship from one based on past attachment to one built on mutual respect for change and growth. It wasn't easy, but our conversations gradually shifted from, I love you, to I appreciate you, and we carefully navigated the waters of friendship. Eventually, we agreed to meet for coffee more regularly, an easygoing reconnection devoid of the expectations of a romantic relationship. Each time felt a little less awkward and gradually transformed into a journey of rediscovering who we truly were outside of our previous roles. Months later, as we settled into our new routine, I found myself embracing the notion of accepting the past while looking forward to what the future might hold. Our shared laughter began to remind me of the good memories while also acknowledging the things we learned from our mistakes. At one of our meetings, Daniel said something that resonated with me. I realize now that love isn't just about being together. It's about knowing when to let go and allowing room for growth. His words lifted a weight off my shoulders. I could finally see the transformation that had taken place, and while we weren't back together as a couple, the bond we were forming was growing stronger, healthier. In time, I became more open to the idea of exploring our relationship further, under entirely different terms. I reflected on our journey, knowing we had faced a completely tumultuous chapter that ultimately shaped who we had both become. I started realizing that while we had endured quite the roller coaster, we had evolved, learned, and now stood alongside each other with renewed understanding and appreciation. If we ever chose to take things further, it would be based on a stable foundation built from growth, emotional resilience, and mutual respect. I started feeling excitement about the prospect of rebuilding our relationship in a healthier way, with no remnants of the past lingering over us like a dark cloud. And that's where I currently am, a little wiser, a little stronger, and ready to see what life has in store for me and for Daniel. I'd love to hear from the community about what they think of my journey. Am I still the butthole for walking out of my wedding? Did I make the right choice by not settling for less? I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives. Thank you for reading my story, and I appreciate you taking the time to understand my experience as I navigate this emotional journey. Am I the butthole for refusing to attend my husband's family events after they called me a gold digger? I'm 28, married to my husband, Dave, 31, for just over 2 years. We had a whirlwind romance filled with mutual support, shared dreams, and, most importantly, laughter. Despite the strong bond we have, his family dynamic has always been a bit of a challenge. For context, Dave comes from a family of traditional values, where higher education and stable careers are often prioritized. On the flip side, I grew up in a financially strained household that greatly shaped my approach to money and relationships. It's not that I don't appreciate stability, I just approach things differently based on my experiences. I work as a freelance graphic designer while pursuing my passion for art, a path that does not follow the conventional 9 to 5 route typically embraced in Dave's family. In the early stages of our relationship, everything seemed peachy. Dave's parents were friendly and supportive. We bonded over shared interests, laughter, and good food. However, when our wedding date was announced, things started to change. It was subtle at first, but tension loomed in the air during family gatherings. Initially thinking I was imagining it, I shrugged it off, attributing it to the inevitable stress of wedding planning. The turning point arrived during a family dinner shortly after our wedding. I could sense an undercurrent of judgment from his parents. Their comments felt oddly pointed, but I couldn't discern if it was all in my head. Yet I sat there, smiling and trying to engage, hoping their uncertainty would dissipate. Months passed, and during a holiday gathering, we all sat around the dinner table. As conversations flowed, I shared my excitement about a new freelance project I had taken on, something I was genuinely proud of. Instead of congratulating me, Dave's sister, Karen, abruptly chimed in. "Well, at least you're not a gold digger trying to suck him dry." The room went silent. I laughed it off at first, thinking she was joking. But when I looked around, I saw their serious expressions. It stung, and I felt hot embarrassment creeping onto my cheeks. I shot a confused glance at Dave, who sat quietly, his face noticeably tense. He quickly brushed it aside, but I could tell the comment bothered him too. In the coming weeks, it felt like I was in a rabbit hole of unending scrutiny. At family events, the subtle jabs continued, things like, "We're so proud of our financial stability," or "I'm sure you'll find steady work eventually." Every time I tried to engage, it felt like they'd find a way to undermine my work or imply my motivations weren't genuine. One Sunday, I decided to confront Dave about what was happening. We had just spent a lovely day out, chatting and laughing, and I thought it was the perfect time. "Why do your family members act like I'm after your money?" I asked carefully, searching for understanding in his eyes. He sighed deeply, looking conflicted. "I don't know, babe. I think they're just old-fashioned. They want what they see as stability for me, and maybe they think you're not good enough," he said candidly. I could hear the heartbreak in his voice. "Good enough? Are they kidding? I'm not here for your money. I love you for who you are." The tears came unbidden as I struggled to articulate my anger and confusion, my heart hammering as I wrestled with this deep sense of injustice. How could they think I could be someone who would only care about money? The whole notion felt ridiculous to me. This conversation deepened the cracks in our relationship with his family. We decided to try to rise above and carry on, despite the negativity. However, things only worsened after a family barbecue where the comments reached an all-time high. After a seemingly tame conversation about house prices, another relative piped up, "Well, Dave's good for it, I'd say. The house will be well furnished as long as his little wife doesn't take all the cash." This time I could no longer sit in silence. I stood up, feeling a mix of exasperation and anger bubbling within me, and left the gathering. Dave rushed after me, his expression one of concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me in the parking lot. "Am I?" "No, I'm not," I exclaimed, the tears flowing again. "What do I have to do to show them I'm not after you for money? I put my heart and soul into this relationship. Why can't they see that?" The next day, we had a long and serious talk, one that ultimately revolved around setting boundaries. That conversation led to the agreement that I would scale back my attendance at family events. I needed a break from the hurtful comments that sent me into spirals of self-doubt. Dave reluctantly agreed, understanding where I was coming from, but knowing how important family was to him. I felt guilty about this decision, but the aid taken against me felt unjust and intense. As time went on, I steadily declined invitations to family events. Holidays passed, and I stopped participating in family outings. Every time someone invited me, it was met with a simple, "I can't make it," and an explanation of needing some personal space, to which I received mixed responses ranging from understanding to outright disapproval. Dave occasionally went to these events alone, and while I could see the toll it took on him, he reassured me that he was on my side. But the drama didn't end there. As the months wore on, I began receiving unsolicited messages from various family members. Some of these texts were blatantly accusatory, while others were passive-aggressive inquiries. "We miss you at dinner," and "wouldn't you rather have good family memories than spend your weekends alone?" became a frustrating norm. One particularly hurtful message came from Karen, who texted, "If you actually loved Dave, you'd make an effort to get to know his family." It felt like another stab in the gut, one that exacerbated my already fragile emotions. The underlying accusation stung worse than anything else. I genuinely did love Dave and wanted to be a part of his family, but how could I, given the circumstances? Finally, David came to me one evening looking disheartened. He was exhausted from the endless cycle of coming home from family events and hearing the judgmental comments about my absence. "I wish you would reconsider coming back to just try," he pleaded, his voice laced with fatigue. "I can't just brush this off, Dave," I replied, my frustration palpable. "Every time I go, I feel belittled. You can't expect me to endure the same hurtful comments again and again. It's emotionally draining." His expression softened, yet he placed both hands firmly on my shoulders. "We can sift through it together. I'll talk to them. Maybe things will change if you give it another shot," he suggested hopefully. "Are you serious?" I couldn't help but feel my defenses rise up. "You really think that will work? They've already shown me who they are. I can't keep putting myself through that." By now, months had passed without direct family gatherings, and I felt comfortable in my own little bubble despite the mounting tension. But the guilt weighed heavily on me. I loved Dave wholeheartedly. I wanted to be part of his world. Yet, how could I support my husband while under the cloud of judgment from his family? Weeks later, Dave invited me to his family's annual summer picnic. At first, I maintained a firm resistance. I imagined all the looks, the comments, and the nicks. I simply didn't want to handle it, especially after months of feeling unloved and unwanted. Eventually, I gave in, thinking this might be a chance for a fresh start. If I could keep my guard up and try to navigate the day without letting their comments get to me, maybe I could find a way to participate in their closeness without internalizing it. The day arrived, and as soon as I stepped into the backyard filled with relatives, bobbing heads, laughter echoing, and the aroma of grilled burgers swirling, I felt the pressure seep back in. I smiled, attempting to be polite to everyone, but just a few comments from the sidelines dampened my spirit. Finally, she graced us with her presence. One relative chirped, while another remarked, "We all thought she was too good for us." The air grew thick as laughter danced between relatives, and I pretended not to hear. Struggling to suppress my agitation, I could feel Dave's hand clench mine just a bit tighter. Throughout the day, the uneasy energy followed me anywhere, and I focused on Dave, trying to have fun while he attempted to redirect conversations away from me. "Why don't you take her to meet the new neighbors? Have you tried Mary's famous potato salad?" he'd say, trying to distract the group. But the undercurrent remained. It became harder to ignore. After hearing another subtle dig about the gold digger joke from the same relative, I had finally reached my breaking point. "Why is it that you keep calling me those things?" I asked directly, my voice trembling slightly. The laughter quieted, and all eyes fell on me. A strange mixture of indignation and disbelief washed over the crowd. I could see confusion in Dave's eyes as he recognized the tension bubbling over. "I'm here because I love your son. He's my husband, not a bank account," I explained, my voice quivering in resolve. "It's incredibly insulting to say otherwise, and honestly, I can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt." Dave's face turned pale, and I could see him wrestling with the rage of defending me while trying to keep his family from spiraling further into an unnecessary argument. The ensuing silence felt torturous, families eyeing one another, shifting uncomfortably, unsure of how to handle the situation. Finally, Dave stepped in, his voice steady yet firm. Enough. My wife is not a gold digger. She is an artist who works hard, and if you ever saw that, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. The tension hung palpably before the family reluctantly acknowledged Dave's request for compassion. I could see glimmers of hesitance in faces that could have held broader support. Gradually, things changed. Strands of acceptance slowly began surfacing. Comments shifted from outright derision to cautious attempts at positivity. I sensed moments of retraction from the gold digger slam that had struck my heart repeatedly over the past months. Conversations opened up. I felt respected, gradually rewarded for standing my ground. After that day, I resolved to honor myself and my heart. I began gradually attending more events, returning to see the goodwill bloom. Unexpectedly, family situations grew easier as we all worked toward the greater good. I learned how to fit into Dave's world without losing myself. Months passed, and I heard fewer references to being a gold digger. I could see glimmers of growth within each family member, which spoke volumes in my heart. I slowly realized those moments of discomfort led to understanding, advocating for what I deserved within my marriage. As I sit here writing this story, I still grapple with those early challenges. Reflecting on a life that thrust me in a different direction, I ask you all, am I the butthole for refusing to attend my husband's family events after they called me a gold digger? Would I have been in the right to let it slide instead of pushing against judgments I didn't deserve? I can't change what they think of me, but I want to live a life where I'm happy and loved with Dave, someone who makes life worthwhile. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I appreciate any insights or thoughts.
Am I the butthole for telling my girlfriend she's too close to her male best friend? So, I, 29M, Ryan, have been dating my girlfriend, 28F, Jessica, for a little over 2 years now, and I genuinely love her. She's bright, funny, and we have a ton of shared interests, making our relationship enjoyable and engaging. However, there is one issue that has been gnawing at me for a while now, and after bringing it up to her, I'm left wondering whether I was completely out of line. Jessica has a male best friend named Eric, 30M. They've been friends for years, long before we started dating, and I fully respect their past friendship. At first, I tried to reassure myself that this was a non-issue, but as our relationship grew more serious, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It's not just how frequently they hang out. It's also the nature of their interactions. They text each other incessantly, and when I catch glimpses of their conversations, I notice their little inside jokes and memes that leave me feeling more like an outsider than a partner. At first, I thought I could get used to it. After all, trust is foundational in any relationship, right? But over time, I became aware that my discomfort was growing into something I couldn't ignore. There have been multiple occasions where Jessica has canceled our plans at the last minute to go hang out with Eric instead, which left me feeling disrespected and unimportant. It didn't help that Eric is a great guy, charismatic and easy to like. So when I see how much joy Jessica gets from spending time with him, it makes me question my own self-worth even further. Moreover, Jessica often tells me how supportive Eric is. She frequently mentions how he listens to her in ways she feels I don't, which stings because I know I am genuinely attentive and caring, but hearing her express that sentiment about someone else is disheartening. Whenever I express my discomfort with their friendship, she brushes it off as just two friends being close and assures me I have nothing to worry about, which further amplifies my feelings of exclusion. The final straw came last week when she received a picture of them having dinner together through a text. I felt a surge of anxiety and irritation well up inside me. I waited until she got home, and after reassuring her that I loved her, I decided to open a discussion about my concerns. I told her clearly that I felt they were too close for comfort, and I struggled with the inconsistency in how much effort she puts into our relationship versus her friendship with Eric. I expected her to understand my feelings and maybe even validate my concerns, but instead, I was met with shock and anger. She accused me of being insecure and controlling, stating that I should trust her more and that it was just a friendship. I felt my anxiety turn into frustration as I tried to explain that I wasn't asking her to end her friendship. Rather, I needed her to consider how it was impacting our relationship. The argument escalated, and I was left feeling like I was fighting an uphill battle. Jessica insisted that I was ruining a beautiful friendship between her and Eric with my jealousy. It hurt because it felt like my concerns were being dismissed as some petty emotional hiccup rather than valid feelings that deserve consideration. After that confrontation, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being unreasonable or projecting my own insecurities onto a healthy friendship that warranted respect. I also began to question whether their friendship was genuinely innocent. Were my feelings the problem? Would pushing too hard damage my relationship with Jessica in the long run? Seeking perspective, I spoke with my brother, James, 31M, and a few close friends to get their thoughts. James, who has always been a voice of reason, suggested that I might want to reconsider the dynamics of their friendship and trust Jessica's judgment. He argued that if she's not giving me red flags, I shouldn't be worried. However, my friends seemed more divided. Some agreed that friendship can sometimes blur boundaries, while others suggested that my feelings were entirely valid. It felt good to know I wasn't the only one wrestling with how to navigate the complexities of relationships, but I went back and forth in my mind about whether my irritation boiled down to misplaced jealousy or was a legitimate concern regarding emotional boundaries. After some time to myself to think things through, I realized that my discontent stemmed less from jealousy and more from feelings of exclusion. I remembered how Jessica always invites me out to hang with her other friends, but with Eric, it felt different since he received her undivided attention. Watching their interactions made me feel like a visitor on the sidelines rather than an essential part of her life. I also considered that we seemed to have different definitions of what it means to be friends. I thought perhaps putting some boundaries around her friendship with Eric could help us both feel more secure. So, I approached her again after letting things cool off, but as soon as I reiterated some of my concerns, things got tense fast. Once again, Jessica resorted to accusations, claiming I was being controlling and overstepping my boundaries. At this point, I started to feel exhausted. I want to be supportive of her friendships, especially one that has clearly meant so much to her, but I'm not sure how to voice my feelings without her thinking I'm trying to control her. Days turned to weeks as I wrestled with this situation. I tried adapting to the notion that maybe my feelings weren't valid, focusing on upsides like how she brings so much energy to our relationship, but every time I saw them together or heard her excitedly recounting her adventures with Eric, it reopened the wound. I began to think that if I didn't address this soon, it could fester and damage our relationship entirely. I decided to do something different. Instead of confronting her again, I began to observe their interactions more closely to try and uncover what exactly made me uncomfortable. I noticed that they had a certain chemistry, a spark during their conversations that felt different from any group interactions she had with her other friends. It was hard not to infer that their connection was deeper than what she was willing to admit. One Saturday night, we were out at a party with a bunch of friends when I saw them laughing on the balcony, whispering secrets and sharing inside jokes. An icy wave of jealousy lapped at my rational thoughts, and when I shared a glance with Jessica, I expected to see a hint of care and reverence in her eyes. But instead, she looked at me as though gauging my reaction. I smiled stiffly, mimicking enthusiasm, even as my insides churned with unease. Later in the evening, as we were leaving, I tried to bring it up lightly. "Hey, you guys seemed really close tonight," I said, attempting to keep my tone casual, but Jessica's face darkened. "Ryan, you need to let this go. I have a deep connection with Eric, and that doesn't lessen what we have," she shot back, clearly irritated. The conversation was left dangling, another unresolved instance in the backdrop of our relationship. I tried to shake it off, but I felt the barrier between us separating. My desire to respect her independence chafed against my feelings of neglect and frustration. Finally, it reached a head when we were at home, sitting across from each other on the couch, trying desperately to ease the tension. "Look, I care about you. I care about us. But I also care about my friendships," Jessica said defiantly, her voice rising. "Just because you're not comfortable with Eric doesn't mean I should change who I am." Then it all spilled out. "Why do you feel the need to defend that friendship so vehemently? You can't see how this is impacting our relationship?" I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. She threw her hands in the air in exasperation. "And why can't you understand that I need friends outside of you? It doesn't mean anything." It was like a dam had burst. our emotions intertwined in a chaotic web of frustration, hurt, and love. The heart-wrenching back and forth left me feeling weaker than I had in weeks, but I knew we had to find common ground or succumb to this slow erosion of trust. Days passed after that intense confrontation, with both of us visibly shaken. I realized it was essential to reach a place of compromise that would allow us both to feel secure. I took a step back and began reflecting on how to merge boundaries with acceptance. One night, while scrolling through social media, a meme caught my eye that perfectly illustrated a healthy friendship's boundaries. I decided to share the meme with Jessica, hoping it could open a dialogue without provocation. To my surprise, she responded positively, initiating a chat about the implications. "Okay, I see that," she said. "But the thing is, I'm not asking you to accept Eric above all else. I just want you to know that I love you, and my friendship with him doesn't take away from that." In that moment, I felt like we were finally making progress. We started to explore boundaries, what felt comfortable and what continued to trigger insecurities. We agreed on the importance of mutual respect for our feelings, but also established that friendships outside our relationship are vital. Weeks went by as we navigated our new landscape, gradually learning to balance independence with companionship. My ties with Jessica felt more secure, and I felt a weight lifting as I began to focus less on what Eric represented and more on cultivating our relationship. As time progressed, I realized that my feelings of discomfort were rooted in fear and uncertainty, not a reflection of any mistrust on Jessica's part. I learned that love should encompass not only connections beyond each other, but also the understanding that jealousy and insecurity could be the enemies of our growth. In conclusion, I've come to understand the rich tapestry of friendships and love that exists in relationships. I want nothing more than for Jessica to thrive as her own person while simultaneously building a strong, unwavering bond between us. I may never fully be at ease with the idea of her friendship with Eric, but recognizing the boundaries and respect we've established has allowed me to slowly work through my insecurities. So, am I the butthole for telling Jessica she's too close to Eric, or was my concern valid? I feel like I'm still on the path to finding the right balance, but I hope this experience has paved the way for open conversations about feelings, trust, and how we can be partners in every sense of the word.
Am I the butthole for not letting my boyfriend's mom move into our apartment? Hey Reddit, I'm in a bit of a pickle and really need perspective on this situation. I, Sophie, a 28-year-old graphic designer, have been living with my boyfriend Ethan, who's 30, for a year now. We both love our cozy little apartment and have worked hard to make it our own space. We're happy together. But things took a turn recently when Ethan's mom, Carol, reached out about moving in with us during a tough time in her life. A bit of context: Carol and Ethan have always had a complicated relationship. She was a single mom who raised him, but as he grew older, he started to notice some patterns in her behavior that weren't exactly ideal. While she loves him, over the years, she has grappled with personal issues, including a recent divorce and struggles with maintaining her own home. About 2 months ago, Carol lost her job, which put her in a precarious financial situation. Ethan had always been supportive of her, both emotionally and financially. However, he recently brought up the idea that perhaps she should move in with us temporarily until she gets back on her feet. At first, I was sympathetic to her circumstances. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's a tough world out there, and she's family. But the more I thought about it, the more I got anxious about the logistics of having her in our space. It isn't just about sharing an apartment, it's about the dynamics that would come into play since we'd essentially be moving from a couple space to an extended family situation. Then came the conversation with Ethan. I expressed my concerns about how I feel we might lose our privacy, and that I worried about having a constant third party in our personal life. We have a pretty good thing going, and for the most part, we have enjoyed our independence and the environment we've created. To put it simply, I let Ethan know that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of moving Carolyn. I didn't mean to sound callous, and I tried to explain that it wasn't about not wanting to help but more about protecting what we've built together as a couple. He seemed taken aback, but promised to talk it over with her. After that, Ethan had a back-and-forth conversation with Carol about my reluctance to have her move in. He said she became really upset, but promised her that he would address it when the time is right. In hindsight, I realize it might have been unfair to put him in that position, but I genuinely felt I was responding from a place of concern for our relationship. What I didn't anticipate was how much Ethan would push back against my decision. He insisted that she's going through a rough time and is his mom. She needs our help. I totally get that, but I can't help feeling uncomfortable about it, especially when I consider what living together could entail. I don't want it to become a situation where our little haven is commandeered by the presence of his mother, even if she doesn't intend to invade our lives. Weeks passed, and I felt guilty for holding my ground. I know this is a tough situation for Ethan. He wants to be a good son, but it just feels unfair that our living situation could be impacted for an indefinite period because of circumstances beyond our control. It finally reached a boiling point when Carol called Ethan and said she thought it was unreasonable for us not to help family in need. She might have mentioned that it's practically a family obligation. That's when I flipped. I replied that it felt more like a family encroachment. Perhaps I shouldn't have been so blunt, but honestly, it crossed a line for me. I accused Ethan of not standing up for what we have built, and he told me that I was being selfish. In that moment, I felt so upset that I stopped talking, wanting to remove myself from the conversation altogether. Eventually, the discussion shifted towards the what-ifs. What if Carol needed help with groceries? What if she needed mental health support? What if she needed help figuring out what to do next? All valid points, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think about how this situation always has so many unpredictables, and it felt overwhelmingly like the rug might get pulled out from under our relationship. Things haven't been the same since that confrontation. Ethan seems distant, and I can tell he's hurt by the idea that I don't support his intentions to help his mom. It's produced this tension between us, and I find myself second-guessing my choice to keep our living situation as it is. All I want is for us to balance our love for each other while still being compassionate human beings. This all leads me to my current situation. Ethan has given me space, but honestly, I miss the way we used to be before this tension set in. I feel cringe when I think back on the entire ordeal and I start thinking, could I have been more empathetic? Was my fear of losing our space justifiable, or was it rooted in selfishness? Did I handle it poorly? A part of me thinks that by prioritizing my and Ethan's needs, I might be seen as unreasonable or a bad girlfriend. I also worry about the implications of Carol moving in with us. For instance, what happens if she starts to get comfortable? What if she begins making decisions about the apartment without consulting us? I've heard stories about family members who move in temporarily, but end up staying much longer than anticipated, and I just can't shake that fear. I love my cozy space, and I want to protect it as much as possible. Then there's the aspect of my and Ethan's relationship. I wonder whether moving Carolyn might impose on our intimacy or create awkward dynamics when it comes to date nights, or even just general downtime at home. I mean, how can we relax if we know Carol is around? It's one thing to see family during holidays or visit for a few days, but to have her living with us? That changes everything. Lately, I've started to feel resentment. I've found myself daydreaming about staying in a hotel or renting a small vacation spot just to escape the tension. I can't help but think, am I being cruel for wanting to preserve what we have? Or is wanting to maintain boundaries in our living space a reasonable request? To add to the confusion, I find myself thinking about how my own parents would have reacted if I had suggested that they move in with Ethan and me. They would probably find the humor in the situation, but also respect my home and boundaries as adults. This contradiction makes everything feel even murkier. What's considered normal support from family when they're going through hard times? And when does it tip over into encroachment or a sense of obligation that infringes on our lives? Meanwhile, Carol continues to reach out to Ethan, slowly wearing down his resolve. She constantly discusses her struggles and expresses her need for support. Ethan constantly brings her up in conversations, his guilt weighing heavily on him, and I can see how much turmoil it's causing him. It makes me feel like the villain in the situation. Here's this woman who gave birth to him, sacrificed so much for him, and now I'm the one saying she can't come live with us. It just doesn't sit right with me. After a couple more heated discussions, I finally had a moment of clarity and told Ethan, I want to help your mom, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of our relationship. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would open the door to a more constructive conversation, but instead, I think it just angered him more. He shot back, "You act like I'm asking you to take care of a stranger. She's my mom. Can't you see how hurtful this is to her?" That struck me hard. It was like a slap in the face. I never wanted to be seen as the one who dismisses family struggles, but I genuinely felt that moving someone into our space involved more than just emotional connections and family ties. It required logistical planning, emotional intelligence, and mutual respect for each other's boundaries. The next few days were strained. I couldn't sleep figuring out if I was a jerk for saying no or if Ethan was taking things too personally. I thought about reaching out to a friend for advice, but felt ashamed to admit the complexities of the situation. It felt wrong to say I don't want Carol in our home, so I kept everything bottled up, hoping it would pass. I thought maybe we'd reach a consensus eventually. Finally, one evening, I hit my breaking point. Ethan casually mentioned that Carol had called him in tears about how lonely and scared she was, completely ignoring the fact that we were both still feeling overwhelmed. It was a moment where I finally snapped, and I told Ethan that while I felt for his mom, I also couldn't sacrifice our happiness or well-being just because of her emotional state. "Why can't you even entertain the idea of finding her alternative arrangements?" I demanded, feeling the frustration bubble over. "I can't be the only one who finds this absolutely unreasonable." He simply stared at me, and we both knew this conversation wasn't leading anywhere productive. He said, "She's my mother, Sophie. I have a responsibility to help her. What kind of son would I be if I just left her helpless?" The next few days were mostly silent on my part. I took long walks after work to clear my head. I told myself that I understood how familial obligation can tie someone up in knots, but more than that, I exhausted myself trying to understand how to garner support for my own needs without being labeled as selfish or uncaring. Eventually, I had enough and reached out to some close friends about it in a group chat. I laid it all out, explaining both my fears and Ethan's perspective. What I got back was a mixed bag of opinions. Some friends were supportive of my need for boundaries, while others felt I should open my heart and home because family is everything. That left me feeling even more confused. How do you navigate these conflicting viewpoints when your primary concern is the happiness of your relationship while still being supportive of family? I needed to understand how to show compassion without losing control over our space and independence. Finally, I decided to confront Ethan again about it. I suggested maybe we could offer to help Carol find a place where she could live while still allowing us to maintain our home life. I proposed financial research or perhaps looking into available shared housing near our area, anything that wouldn't ruin the life we've built together. But he shook his head in defeat, claiming all I wanted to do was keep her out at all costs. At this point, I felt like we were stuck in a rut. We were both coming from raw emotions, but without realizing our love for each other. Neither of us seemed to see the other person's perspective. After several more arguments and emotional breakdowns, I finally began wondering if I was becoming the butthole for my stance. Reddit, I reach out to you in hopes of clarity. Am I the butthole for not wanting Carol to move in? Should I compromise my boundaries for the sake of his family ties? Or is wanting to preserve my and Ethan's relationship and our living space a justifiable request? I feel like there's so much at stake, and I don't want resentment to grow between us because of someone else's needs. Any advice or constructive thoughts would be greatly appreciated. Anything to help me see beyond my personal fears would mean the world. Thanks for reading, guys. I really hope to gain insight on this confusing mess.
Am I the butthole for telling my wife her cooking is awful? I'm Jake, a 32-year-old guy working in tech. I've been married to my wife, Lily, for 30 months now. We both have our quirks, and I guess that's what drew me to her. We met at a friend's party. I was in my element, talking about my favorite niche indie bands and pretending I knew how to grill the perfect steak. She caught my eye across the room, laughing with a group of friends, the kind of laugh that lights up the dullest of spaces. Initially, I was smitten, and I can tell you every silly reason why I fell in love with her. The way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her favorite fantasy novels, her passion for Greek mythology, and even her terrible but hilarious dance moves. But there was one caveat that came with this beautiful package: cooking, or rather, her lack of cooking skills. We're talking about the let's put a whole jar of cinnamon in the chili level of cooking disasters. I thought it was cute at first and didn't want to rock the boat. I mean, what's a little burnt toast here and there, right? Lucy, my mother, once told me that a way to a man's heart is through his stomach. She forgot to mention that this rule applies to both parties involved. So fast forward to 3 years later, and here I am questioning if honesty and kindness can coexist in my marriage, all because of what we eat. During the early days of our courtship, I often invited Lily over for dinner and was the one cooking, always trying to impress her. I made homemade presentations of meals that would put any five-star restaurant to shame. Beef Wellington, coq au vin, even soufflés. I was state-of-the-art, and I loved every minute of it. In return, Lily would bring dessert, a mediocre selection of cookies or a half-baked cake that was more flour than flavor. I'd praise her efforts regardless, inhaling the rather unappetizing treats she brought while drafting up a list of strategies for future baking guidance. As our relationship blossomed, we'd often joke about cooking together. But when we faced a moment to put that joke to the test, anxiety rippled through my mind. Not wanting to scare her away, I avoided mentioning my secret fear, her kitchen disasters. I kept up this charade of everything tastes amazing until the invitations to her kitchen became more frequent. Fast forward to last Christmas, when I had dreams of a perfectly cooked holiday feast. Feeling somewhat brave, I suggested a holiday dinner at home with just the two of us instead of defaulting to our families. Lily was thrilled, and I felt the butterflies of excitement shift into dread. We planned a menu together, opting for a classic turkey with all the fixings. It was a great outlet for our collective creativity and a bonding moment, until it turned into a nightmare when cooking day arrived, and I suddenly felt like a contestant on a cooking show. I woke up to the smell of something burning. Rushing to the kitchen, I found smoke wafting from a pot that was rapidly turning into a charcoal pit. Lily was looking utterly flummoxed and attempted to explain that she was experimenting with a new recipe for gravy. Upon inspection, the recipe book looked more like an abstract painting covered in drips and stains, ultimately leading me to believe that my darling wife had taken improvisation just a tad too far. "Babe, what's going on?" I asked with a gentle tone. "I thought I'd give it a unique twist. It smells divine, doesn't it?" She looked almost like a child whose finger was caught in the cookie jar. I took a deep breath, but every fiber of my being wanted to say, "It smells like a coal mine." I held back my words, opting for a pep talk instead. I tried to channel my enthusiasm into how adventurous she was, but deep down, something felt heavier. But everything truly came to a head on our anniversary, just a few months later. I planned a beautiful celebration that I had envisioned for months, a candlelit dinner at home, her favorite wine, and a gorgeous centerpiece of wildflowers I picked out myself. I had every hope that this night would be one to remember, the epitome of love encapsulated in a dining experience. I decided to let her cook for the night, hoping she'd channel that creative energy into something magical. Little did I know, my dreams would soon become nightmares. The table was set, soft music in the background, and she announced the dish she prepared. An intricate-looking pasta dish. It was plated beautifully, colors popping, shapes elegant. But as she served me, an undercurrent of dread lay beneath my hopeful facade. I take a bite and it hit me like a truck. What the hell is this? The sauce, though visually appealing, tasted oddly ashy and perplexingly sweet. I felt like I was biting into a dessert that didn't know it was a dessert. As the silence lingered, I could see that uncertainty etched across her face. My stomach churned. I couldn't stomach the rest of the meal without being frank. "Honey, maybe cooking isn't your thing," I accidentally muttered through a mouthful of panic. And just like that harmless comment spiraled into a tsunami of hurt feelings. Her expression changed from pride to devastation, and within seconds, tears brimmed in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't mean it that way. I want you to know I appreciate your effort, but..." What followed was a flurry of accusations, a haze of emotions where everything I said got misconstrued. How did we go from celebrating our love to tearing each other apart over dinner like two gladiators in an arena? I sat there, echoing her hurt words back to her. You don't support me. This isn't about cooking skills. It's about our relationship. One night rolled into the next, marked by chilly silences and tense conversations. I went to work each day, desperately attempting to escape the cloud hovering over our home. Every text message had an added layer of second-guessing. Every meal suddenly became daunting, and every playful reminder of her dining calamities felt like stepping onto a landmine. A week later, I made the decision to open up a dialogue. Can we talk? I started, feeling the weight of the world on my chest. Lily looked at me with a mix of surprise and wariness, but she nodded, her expression softening. We broke everything down, piece by piece. I explained my side of the picture. She shared her vulnerabilities. We started understanding each other's feelings. After hours of back and forth, we agreed on one crucial point. We love each other, and cooking would not break us. After some more discussion, we agreed to take cooking classes together. It felt like a peace treaty in the kitchen, and I hoped it would help us merge our two different worlds. We signed up for a local class that promised hands-on experience learning traditional Italian dishes. The first class was awkward. There were nervous glances, laughter that was too loud, and a palpable tension hanging in the air. But as we donned our aprons and got to work, I felt a sense of camaraderie slowly brewing. Our instructor, a spaghetti-slinging Italian chef named Marco, noticed the tension and made us partner up, forcing us to work together. It was a godsend. Marco's booming laughter and relentless positivity lulled us into a more relaxed state. Cooking is about the experience, not the end product, he yelled, demonstrating a hand-rolled pasta technique that was borderline mesmerizing. Suddenly, what felt impossible transformed into something tangible. I could hear Lily giggling beside me, her usual reservations replaced by a sense of curiosity. We were creating something together, and I saw the glimmer of excitement in her eyes. As we immersed ourselves in the culinary world with Marco's guidance, Lily found joy in kneading dough, measuring out precise ingredients, and learning the intricacies of flavor combinations. I watched, proud and glad we chose to embark on this journey together. After a few lessons, our kitchen dynamic shifted. We began planning meals together, taking turns picking recipes that inspired us. Lily suggested trying her hand at dishes she had always deemed off-limits, and I encouraged her explorations. I even threw in a few quirky recipes I had gathered from online cooking blogs. But, just as life is rarely a straight path, Lily's culinary journey did not come without its bumps. One Saturday afternoon found us excitedly poised to create a homemade pizza. Alas, another Pinterest attempt gone wrong when it inexplicably morphed into a cheese lava explosion. I stood there with a shell-shocked expression, watching our dinner turn into a gooey disaster that looked more suited for a Halloween buffet than a cozy meal. Lily, I sighed, what is going on? I thought this was the right way, she admitted sheepishly, holding up a packet of hard, aged cheese. It was clear that the cheese was more suited for sprinkling than dolloping by the cupful. But honey, this needs balance. Too much cheese can overwhelm the rest. Like my heart sometimes. I smiled as I said the last part, trying to lighten the mood. With our bond slowly solidifying over our shared kitchen laughter and new experiences, I recognized something vital. We were in this together, regardless of who wielded the spatula. As weeks turned into months, we struck a balance in our culinary escapades. Between classes, tackle sessions with various recipes, and late-night laughter on the kitchen floor, we learned to find joy not only in the food itself but in the process. Even when the dishes came out subpar, we would laugh it off, vowing to try again another day. I learned to appreciate cooking as a joint effort rather than a solitary task I could perfect independently. Balance became our mantra, and together we embraced the delight of exploration. One day, Lily remarked, "Isn't life like cooking? You try something new, sometimes it doesn't work, but it always leads to something unique." And she was right. The unexpected became the adventure. However, one evening, as I returned from picking up dinner supplies, I found Lily sitting at the table, looking forlorn. My heart sank. Was she feeling overwhelmed again? "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, pulling up a chair next to her. "I don't think I'll ever be a good cook," she stated morosely. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully, not wanting to trigger anything. It doesn't matter if you're the best cook in the world. What matters is that you're learning and that I'm right here with you. Her eyes softened, and I continued, Do you remember our first class? Marco said it's the experience that counts. She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her. You know, I could never do this without you, she whispered, her confidence seemingly restored. Behind those moments of honesty, we grew. We found ourselves reaching for one another's hands, feeling empowered by each other's presence. Eventually, the ebb and flow culminated in our housewarming party, a well-deserved invite to our new friends' post-pandemic lockdowns. Eager to showcase our efforts, we whipped up a variety of our new favorite dishes. As the day arrived, everything seemed perfect. The table showcased a colorful arrangement of freshly made bruschetta, creamy risottos, and a rustic vegetable assortment, topping it off with a beautiful homemade lasagna. The first bite my friends took was met with smiles, and the energy of nostalgia electrified the evening. However, I noticed Lily standing there in the corner, a swirl of anxiety in her expression that almost mirrored how I felt right before we married. In that moment, I shared a glance with her, and it told me everything.